Hey guys, and welcome back. My name is James, and today we're going to be making this travel wallet or passport holder out of leather. I've been doing leather work for the last 3 years now, and one thing in France that's difficult to find is a good supplier of leather and leather accessories and tools, and that's why I've partnered up with the supplier that I always used, which is decorative here in France, but they also sell and ship internationally with some English pages up there. All the links, especially for the pattern which you can download for free, will be in the description below, and I really encourage you to go and check it out and grab a copy for yourself and enjoy the build with this video. Hopefully you have fun making this passport holder along with me and enjoy this video. As I mentioned, all the links will be in the description below, guys, and you will be able to find this pattern as a free download. And once you've downloaded it and go ahead and print it, make sure that your printing settings are set as to make the pattern 100% of the normal size. Now, sometimes printers can shrink, resize pictures a bit when you print them out. Just make sure that you're working with the exact same pattern as I am in order for all the stitching and all the different sizes to match. This is very important as the tolerances on this are actually quite close. So if you're off by even a millimeter, just over a millimeter, you may find that your passport no longer holds. I have included a guide, a cutting guide or a printing guide on this so you can check that the measurements are correct. It is in centimeters. You may have to convert that into inches if you're working with the non-metric system. Once it's all ready, I am going to be using vegetable tanned leather. I do recommend 1.2 millimeter thickness. Obviously, if you're used to working with other types of leather, these will work also. The pattern works whichever sizes of leather or types of leather you may choose, but in this case I do recommend going with a vegetable tanned leather, as this will make the next few steps much more logical, and you can follow along these steps if you're working with the similar type of leather. Now, if you're used to other types of leather, that's fine. You may just have to adapt some of them, especially for example the dyeing technique and the edging technique. So I'm using Fibing's Pro Dye on all my builds here for a vegetable tanned leather. I just find it works best. I try and do 3 coats of this and alternating directions in passing, and I find that most of the time this works well. Now, I do have a few tricks that I could recommend. First of all, I like daubers or daubers, wool daubers for this if it's a small piece, but on a big piece, the best for me is a simple rag, an old t-shirt. Anything will do. Best is just pure cotton rag is great. And just go ahead and apply that in nice big strokes. I will always add a bit of nito oil afterwards, as the leather dye will dry out the leather slightly and you want to bring back some of those natural oils back into the leather. You can use different types of oils, of course. Many moisturizing oils, at least that's what's most important here, is to moisturize the leather and make sure it gets the oils back in. Many different oils work, but for leather, nito oil is by far the best, and you can find it at any proper leather supplier, especially decorative. You can find a few different options over there. So make sure you've got a bit of nito oil lying around. Now, you don't really need much, and it's easy to overdo it. You really don't need much. Just a light coat will do on this one, just to bring back some of those oils and make sure that the leather doesn't go too dry on you. Go ahead and cut out your leather pieces. Now, you may have noticed at the beginning of the video that I stropped this little cutting tool, which is actually an Indispensable by Verger Blanchard, which is a really fun little cutting tool, really useful, very versatile, great little piece of kit to have on you, and will last you absolutely decades as the blade wears out, which doesn't really wear out very fast. You can just slide it down, so in theory it will last you forever. You can even change out the blades for different blades if you want to, but I always recommend stropping, or at least making sure that all your tools are sharp. The sharper your tool, the less strength you'll need to press down with it, and the less chances of you hurting yourself when you eventually slip, as we all do eventually. This is an optional step here, totally optional. I decided to go with a lining on the inside of my leather. You don't need to do this, but I wanted to add it as it really does dress up the inside of that leather quite nicely, and makes it a much more personal touch here, makes it a much more personal piece of leather equipment. You will want to mark out where that lining is going to be on the inside. It will help you stick it down, as the lining has to be a few millimeters smaller on every side than your leather piece. I'm using some basic glue here from decorative, which is actually surprisingly good. It's a water-based glue, very easy to use, and works great in all the applications that I've been using it so far, and I'm very pleased with that. As I mentioned, the inside lining has to be a bit smaller, and the reason for this is that you want to burnish your sides later after you've stuck them together and sewn them together or stitched them together. And if you have some linen or some material between two layers of leather, you may not achieve the same burnish at the end. So my recommendation, if you can, try and make it a bit smaller for the lining than the actual piece of the leather. I'm using a really great edger here. It's a Barry King tool edger, and I have to say I am tremendously impressed. Now the size I'm using is 00, so the smallest size you can find, and it just does an amazing job getting through basically anything I throw at it, giving me a really nice consistent rounded edge. Again, this is if you're starting off in leathercraft. Tools and equipment can be expensive. Decorative have a great selection of all sorts of prices, so do check it out. But I did start off myself with a very limited budget and had to resort to using sanding paper, and this works great as well. It really does work great. But I have to say, upgrading to this Barry King's tool edger was a real surprise. I didn't expect it to be as practical and as useful as what I was used to using. I went ahead and used some Adrigant gum, so it's just basic gum that will grab into the fibers and it will help solidify those fibers when you come and burnish the piece. This one again was sent to me by decorative, and I really do like it. I've been using a few of their products, and they're really quite excellent for the price. And if you're starting out and don't have necessarily a bit of toconol left over or lying around, which I don't, it's surprisingly hard to find in France. But if you don't have toconol, which is apparently the absolute best to have, just a basic bit of gum trag, tragicant, adrigant, it depends what type of gum you have. It's pretty much all the same, but you can find different variations, different wordings on those around the web. But that helps, again, as I mentioned, seal in those fibers when you go in and burnish them. I also like to add in a bit of beeswax here as one of the final steps to my burnishing process. You did see me warm it up just before applying it, which really helps. Now the beeswax will do two things. First of all, it's another layer of burnishing you're giving to your leather. So once more, if you've missed a bit of a small area on that leather edge, presumably with this extra step of burnishing, you will get to it as well. Secondly, the beeswax will help seal in once more and protect those edges from any harm that may come to them. This is, as you're seeing, an optional step, but a really nice step, which is to add a decorative crease on your piece. And I'm using a nice creaser from decorative, which were one of their own tools, and this is the first time I'm using it. And for those of you who are used to using edge creases, you'll see I've made a few small mistakes, but overall, let's ignore those mistakes. Overall, I'm very happy with the way this came out. First time using these tools, and surprisingly easy to use. It takes time and patience, but that's basically everything at first. It takes time and patience to get right, and I'm very pleased with the results, even though I've never creased an edge before, so this has been a fun experiment for me, and I definitely will be doing it more on my pieces. As I mentioned, using some basic water-based glue, but it's working gorgeously here. I did scuff up the outer layer of the skin layer of the leather just to make sure that the glue had something to adhere to. I let the glue dry for 5 to 10 minutes and then went ahead and stuck my two pieces together. Make sure you're trying to get the edges as close as possible. There were different ways that you may want to treat the edges or rectify, I'd have to say, the cuts on those edges later, but making sure that everything fits nicely at this step does reduce the amount of work in the next few steps. Once you've attached the front pocket or the inside pocket for the cards, the card holder I call it, go ahead and mark out your stitching line. You can use the template provided for that. Just go ahead with an awl and prick your first and last stitch, or just make sure you've got a reference line, reference guide to go ahead and stitch. Use any stitching method you want. I mean, some people like to use machine stitches, some people go ahead with a simple lock stitch. I use the more trusted and traditional saddle stitch technique. And if you're new to leather crafting, there are many amazing tutorials online by people who know way more in leather craft than I do, and you can find out all about your saddle stitching needs over there. I'll be using, throughout this build, I'm using Maisie thread. Maisie thread is actually a relatively new thread in the industry, I believe, but I stumbled upon it about a year ago, and since then I have not been able to go anywhere else for my thread needs. Now, one thing I was a bit annoyed about with decorative when I started off is that when I discovered Maisie at least, is that they did not have this thread as part of their catalog, but they've told me that they now do. So if you're like me and having trouble finding it in Europe, decorative do have them on their website, or at least they should any day now on their website, and that is a huge bonus point in their favor as far as I'm concerned. So if you're like me and you're having issues finding some supplies, specific supplies, well, this is a website that I've been using, as I mentioned, for 3 years now, and they've always had what I needed, more or less. The only thing, I'd love some toconol. If you can find toconol, guys, if you're listening, that'd be amazing. But that being said, I've loved them for the last 3 years, and yeah, they've added Maisie thread. Go ahead and check it out. It's an amazing thread. I believe right now they only have the linen version on their website, but they do also have a polyester version, which I'm dying to get my hands on as well and testing that out. In the meantime, here we go for the build. Back to the build. We've stuck the front and the back together, and at this point just let it dry. Come back to it the next day, and I'm opening up my workshop here and finding this piece just calmly, gently waiting for me on my bench. And by now the glue is all dry, and this will enable you to do two things. Well, one thing really. Make sure the edges are nice and straight and ready for burnishing. As you see, there are different ways of doing it. You can either cut the edges, and I will be doing this in a minute. I will be taking a ruler and cutting a nice straight edge, or you can go ahead and sand the edges down. Now, both of these ways work great. I do like to sand because it gives me more precision, and it enables me to maybe get rid of some imperfections without getting rid of too much leather. But if you give yourself an extra millimeter of leather on all the sides, then you can just go ahead with a straight ruler or a blade and just cut straight down, and this gives you a really pristine edge with which to work with. Sorry guys, it's a bit complicated. The reason you want this is that during your burnishing process, you will need a nice edge to start off with. It makes your burnishing just so much easier, to be honest. You can always burnish a rough edge, that's not an issue, but it will take you so much longer and the result will not be as clean. Again, go ahead and bevel the edge to your preference. It's not necessarily needed. You could also go with sandpaper, as I mentioned, but I love to bevel it, especially with this new Barry King edge. Just gorgeous, gorgeous cut. Go ahead and add the gum trag or the toconol if you're that lucky to have some, and burnish. Once you've done that, you're pretty much ready to go, except for one last crucial operation, which is to mark out 3 millimeters for your stitching line and stitch all around the piece. On this piece, you'll find that on the template at least, you'll find that all the different lines are marked out, and my references for these are going to be, I do recommend 3 millimeters away from the edge, but if you want to vary that, bear in mind that you may have to make your main body slightly larger, slightly wider to accommodate for any variation there. If you follow the guide precisely, this is what you'll get once you've punched through. For those curious about what I'm using as stitching punches or hold awls or whatever, I'm using crimson irons, which are really the ones you see there, the pricking forks, pricking irons, and absolutely love them. But any set will do for this here, any sizes. Just get used to using your own, and you'll find that you'll be able to achieve a really nice stitch if you match the right stitching or pricking irons to the right thread. You get some really gorgeous results. In my case with the Maisie, it's just a result that I absolutely love, and I come back to it time and time again, and I can't get enough of it. In this build, I go ahead and crease the edges once more. I find it really adds some like it finishes out the piece very nicely. You know, it's like a last shine, although this isn't the last shine on this piece, but it does really help give it that extra little bit of quality. Or at least it feels like it gives it that extra bit of quality. I don't really know, but I love the look. Again, look is very subjective. You may prefer without, but if you do have an edger, go ahead and use this as an opportunity to add an edge all around. Once more, I like to protect my edges with beeswax, as you can see, by warming it up, because it's a really hard block of beeswax. If you're used to using beeswax, you may want to try this out. It's a very simple technique, and it doesn't take any extra time. If ever, it saves you a lot of time, and it saves me at least having to press down with my beeswax onto the edges, and therefore helps me get a better and easier surface to work with later when I burnish. For the final polish, I go ahead and use my trusty Saphir Médaille d'Or, which is the shoe polish that I've been using for the last few months, if not a year now, I can't remember. I've tried out so many different polishes, from cheap to expensive, and yes, Saphir products are more expensive, sometimes 3 to 4 times more expensive, sometimes even more expensive than that, versus your base products, but I find they do such an amazing job at giving, first of all, protecting your leather, which is what a polish does best. It really does work well to protect your leather from the elements and keep your leather moisturized if you're using the right products, but also give your leather a really nice shine. So go ahead and apply first coat, a second coat, let those coats dry for a few minutes and buff them off, and you can already see just how gorgeous this leather with the saddle tan dye is turning out to be. And any second now we're going to have a look at the final result. But as a final word on Saphir, they have a billion products, but you really can't go wrong with them. And as you can see, guys, it looks really nice. It's incredibly functional. This specific one is going to be given to my sister as a congratulations on getting her new job present, but I have to say that I've got one for myself, and if I'm going to be traveling, I'll probably be using it, because it makes a lot of sense to be able to have your wallet and a few cards and some spare change in your pocket all in one place, just making sure that you don't lose anything on a very important trip, especially if you're going on holiday. Well, who knows when we'll be going on holiday, but if you do, hopefully you guys think about picking one of these up. As I mentioned, guys, all the links to everything you've seen in this video are in the description below. Hopefully, actually not just hopefully, I really do invite you to go and click on those links, discover decorative, and hopefully you've enjoyed making your own, and I'll see you very soon for some more leathercraft.